Pilot stigma and safety concerns have become a topical conversation within media and government. Communication materials or guidelines for pilots on how to identify Starlink or any type of modern artificial satellite is not yet available. Why not? And who's responsible for this? Elon Musk? Commercial airlines? Pilots themselves? Or the FAA? Former Navy fighter pilot and chair of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, UAP Integration and Outreach Committee, Ryan Graves, joins me to discuss pilot safety and action-based solutions on how to change UAP reporting issues. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on Rebelliously Curious today. I have been so excited to talk to you. I've talked to one former pilot, but I've never ever spoken to a fighter pilot before. So thank you for being on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. So I'd like to start off with, you've logged over 2,000 fighter jet pilot hours, if that's how you would say it. Can you tell me just briefly kind of what is the day in the life of a fighter pilot? What is it like?
Yeah. So, a lot of times, unfortunately, it can start pretty early in the morning, but really whenever we have a flight that we're training for, kind of one of our training flights, we'll typically have about a 2 to 3 to 4 hour pre-flight kind of brief preparation and training and planning type operation that will go on. That might be split over more than one day if necessary. And then you'll actually execute the flight, which could be only an hour or 45 minutes long, or maybe upwards to an hour and a half for these type of flights. And then you'll come back. And for these, you might debrief for anywhere from 2 hours to 6 hours about the details of the flight so you can improve, sometimes frame by frame, on the recording equipment to make sure that our shots are within valid windows and we're targeting to the right groups and everything else that we need to consider. When we go in the combat, it's a little bit different. We'll train and we'll brief, or excuse me, we'll brief and speak with intelligence folks that will kind of give us the lay of the land and make us ready to go on the missions that are prepared for us essentially for that day. And then we'll go back and we'll brief as a flight, making sure we all understand what we need to do. Then we'll launch on that flight, and those flights can be anywhere from 6 to 9 hours long. Typically, we'll refuel once or twice on the way in, and then execute a mission for another period of time, then go fuel again, another set of missions, and then start transiting back and tanking a couple times on the way back and coming back for what's usually a night landing at that point on the boat. Then we'll come back and debrief intelligence and everything else and report what we need to report and try to get some sleep and then do it again the next day.
Wow. I'm never going to complain about my day ever again. Let's be honest. I can't even imagine being up, especially in combat for that long. I can imagine the adrenaline, unless you're trained for that adrenaline not to go through your body like that. But
we really are. Yeah, we're not flying around with adrenaline there. I mean, I remember the first time I dropped a weapon in combat, and if there was any time for there to be adrenaline, that was it. But there was normal anticipation and the feeling of being very cautious and careful and but not necessarily those other feelings. Yeah.
After, obviously, as we know, people that follow this podcast and follow the UAP narrative know that you have a major hand in it now, talking about pilots and pilot safety. Moving from being a fighter pilot and then to doing what you're doing now with the AIAA and multiple other things that you're doing as well for advocating pilot safety. Did you feel that it was a sense of duty that you had to do this?
Well, yeah. The Navy actually trained me to be an aviation safety officer. And so I was specifically responsible in my squadron for ensuring the safety of the operations of our aircraft. And so this was just really a natural conversation. It was simply the same conversation we were somewhat trying to figure out there. And we didn't have the mechanisms of the way to do it. So the responsibility was to continue to try to bring attention to it so that we could try to resolve the issue in some way. It was absolutely, I felt the responsibility. I mean, it just because I got out of the military didn't mean that the problem wasn't there still.
Oh, for sure. 100%. It's been a problem for a very long time, and for
I
multiple
mean, that's
pilots
how
over
I
the
felt,
years.
right? It's like
Yeah.
in some ways it could have almost been like, you dropped the pack in some sense, but for some reason it just never occurred to me I should have just stopped caring about that in some sense.
Right. And you never visually in 2014, 2015, you never actually visually saw the UAP. You ended up seeing it on radar, but it had some form of cloaking, let's use, or it was invisible. We know that another pilot did end up seeing it where he said he saw the cube shape. And so can you explain to me though, when you saw this on radar, like what your initial feeling was? Like what was the emotional attachment kind of going through that?
Mhm. Well, unfortunately, and I've had to say this before, is that there really wasn't that the first time because for us, this wasn't a moment when we first saw it that we thought or knew it was exceptional, right? It was just perhaps radar error or something else that we'd have an explanation for. So it
Right.
was a super, very long, gradual process that, I'm not even going to claim everyone got to, right? Because we still don't know what they are. Um, but yeah, there was never that moment where we just kind of like totally flipped the switch, uh, except for maybe one case, and that's when we almost actually physically hit one of these objects. The aircraft that saw it and flew right by it. That was certainly a moment where they, were reconsidering what they thought these objects were, and a lot of us were as well. Um, but if nothing else, that's when we knew it was truly a safety issue that we had to be concerned about. And that's when we wrote our first hazard report to kind of notify the rest of the fleet that something was happening.
Yeah, because I can imagine there'd be a moment of like, what's going on? Is this some kind of drone special project that's going on? When you came to that realization that it potentially could be something that is not a foreign adversary or part of American government or any government, like what was your thoughts to that? Like what went through your mind? It's kind of
Well,
like
that
people having that, that paradigm shift. Like
Well,
you
I'm like
must
in
have
the
had that.
process of going through that in some sense, right? Like that is kind
Yeah.
of the journey that I've been on for a number of years in some sense. So I think you're, more or less witnessing it in real time. So it's, that's just part of the process here. And, I'm not, again, we didn't figure it out per se then. And even now, we still don't know what it is. There's a lot of indications
Yeah.
that lead us to believe it's not the US government based on their own words and, what we see. And, we don't see evidence for these behaviors in foreign adversaries either. That doesn't mean we know what it is now. It just means that now the questions are getting harder, and we need to do more science on it to figure out what they are. And so that's the journey I'm on right now. So when I do have that moment, I'll let you know how it feels.
Yeah, I'd love to know that we can have another conversation, another chat, because going through any form of paradigm shift and, I've talked to tons of different people, from banking to you name it, that will message me or I'll talk to and become friends with, and we'll chat about their kind of paradigm shift because I find it really interesting because psychologically, if you've never really thought about UAPs or even you've obviously seen them or know people that have had even close collisions with them, it can really mess with your mind, I would imagine.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you've now working with the AIAA. So, you said though, with a quote, it says, "We're stepping into new territory." And you were talking to former Politico, Brian Bender, the journalist there. Do you know that the AIA actually has worked within UFOs and has a history in it? For I believe one of their first conferences they ever did in panels was in January 21st, 1970, and J. Allen Hynek was part of it. Did you know that getting? Because I know that in that piece it says this is new territory for you guys, but it really isn't. And maybe you do know, or maybe you not don't know. But why then did the AIAA stop getting involved? We know that, the Condon report could be part of that. But after that, they pretty much went silent on the topic until recently, until your involvement.
Mhm. I am aware of their involvement back in in their time period. I've actually seen the documents that have gone back and forth between the president of the AIAA at that point and the people that were raising it. It was interesting that they like to use the word believers in quotes to describe the people that were engaging in the topic. We don't have any believers in the UAPIOC at the AIAA anymore. What we have is a lot of scientists and engineers that have been within the industry for combined in the hundreds, if not thousands of years. And what we're doing now, this new territory we're entering on, is a really pragmatic, detailed, and long-term study of this topic that is industry first and going to be sustained over time. We're going to be publishing papers. We're going to be holding conferences. We're going to be sharing our learnings throughout the industry so that other technologists can step in and start building technology around what we learn so that we can just gather more data and advance the topic.
What do you say to them, people within the pilot community and other people that are following this? What are things that they can do to actually make this actionable? Because you're using things like conferences and tactics to get these messages forward. But what do you say to other people? What can they do to go forward to kind of break that stigma that you've been speaking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing for at least on the pilot side, I've created a podcast where we can have just a rational, serious conversation about the UAP topic, and essentially the continuing theme of that podcast. I'm going to be having conversations with pilots, both commercial and military, that have experiences with UAP or UFO, and we're not looking to draw conclusions or to analyze your situation. We're just looking to bring awareness to the quantity and the varying qualities of these reports, and just have those pilots share their experiences and just discuss it rationally and scientifically, and just share those with everyone. So if you're a pilot that has one of those stories, you can reach out to me and us at pilots@mergepoint.com. So that's very specific for air crew there. Now, I'm not asking any military pilots to come and communicate anything classified or part of any ongoing reporting mechanism within the military. That's not the intent. But I am happy to talk to military people that do have the proper ability to speak publicly, as well, of course, any commercial or general aviation pilots. For the non-aviators as well, for people, of course, within the engineering specialties and science and even communications, at the AIAA, you can join our group and you can help with some of these efforts. We have efforts under our hardware factors subcommittee, looking to publish a document on a yearly basis that describes our ability to understand the best detection, characterization, and evaluation methods for sensing UAP. We'll be looking to get the sensing phenomenologies and frequencies and everything that is relevant for detecting these out into that industry, so that, again, other people can then pick up the flag and try to build cool tools to go figure out what these are. And so if you are inclined on the technical side, on the engineering side within the aerospace domains, please reach out to us. You can go to AIAAUAP.org and you can get in touch with us there.
Love that, because I always find that people will say that they have tactics, but they'll never offer solutions for people to get involved and how they can make things actionable. And I think it's really important that in anything we do from any topic, that there's always, if we're looking for solutions, we give people reasons to be actionable too, right? Especially when it comes to something like this, when you're looking for truth and transparency. We
Yeah.
know that there is so much stigma still around the UAP topic. It's obviously changing. And we do have media that, will speak about this in a positive light. We know from the New York Times, we've seen from Politico, which I've obviously said, we've seen from Washington Post. We've seen a mixed variety of conversations from the Washington Post, to be honest. But recently we've seen that the Wall Street Journal, and it was the reporter or journalist Holman Jenkins who did a piece that was really not positive to the UAP topic. And you obviously had a part in this, and you had a rebuttal too that you wrote for the debrief. So what do you think that enticed him to be able to write something like that in that narrative? Like, is it someone who doesn't feel that this has any validity whatsoever? Or was he looking for clickbait? Like, what made you think that he would write this? And then why did the Wall Street Journal not publish your rebuttal? Because I know that you said that on Twitter, and then we were
Mhm.
happy to do it at the debrief.
Well, I won't I won't be able to make any assumptions about his motives, I'll say, but I will say the data kind of speaks for itself. He made some pretty I think broad claims that turned out to not quite pan out, at least in the tone that he presented the information when the port eventually did drop. So I think the communication tact that he is taking is fairly obvious, and his reporting on this conversation is clearly biased. And so, I don't know what to really add after that. That's my opinion of his reporting.
I think the Wall Street Journal, why do you feel that they did not publish your rebuttal? Because it does make sense that they should have, if there is a secondary opinion, and you're obviously an expert in this space when it comes to anything that's aviation based. So why do you feel that they said no and they leaned towards their own perspective and their journalist perspective?
Well, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question either, but I will try again and we'll see what happens.
That that's fair. So we've looked at multiple things that have happened within commercial airlines right now. We've obviously seen fighter pilots when we're looking at American tech or anything else around aviation. So we've had a lot of commercial airlines recently that have had multiple UAP sightings. So who's at fault for this when it comes into not possibly reporting or giving communications of what these people are seeing? So we're noticing that, for example, Starlink plays a huge part in this. We have figured out that some of these incidences that might be UAP based that are commercial pilots are obviously Starlink, and some of them are not. Right, we're seeing a mix of that. Who is to blame then? I'll say, when it comes into then communicating to aviation companies or to commercial airlines, or just to companies in general that are carrying passengers. Who is it their job to communicate what Starlink looks like and to be able to identify these things? Because we have a huge problem if it's not UAP, and we're getting all of these pilots calling in and saying that they can't identify something that's new technology in the sky. Do we blame Elon Musk? Do we blame pilots? Like, who's at fault here, and what do we do then to solve those issues so that we don't have these reporting problems?
So right now, there is no real centralized, the real essence of the problem is that there is no organized reporting mechanism that centralizes anomalous reporting within the commercial ecosystem or the military to a complete degree, although we're seeing the formation of that. Now, there are reporting mechanisms that exist already that do very similar jobs, such as the ASRS or the ASAP program. And these programs are trusted programs that are run out of, in some cases, NASA or elsewhere. And these would be appropriate mechanisms for interfacing with that type of data. So there are means for actually um, there are trusted mechanisms that pilots would use to submit this information. However, the regulations that would require such reporting do not say that. In fact, what they do say is they say if the aircrew would like to make a report, then they can send it out to some of these groups that are outside, and they list a few organizations that are non-governmental organizations that are, and there's several of them. So they basically just scatter the data to the wind, right? That's what's
Right.
actually in the aviation recommendations right now. So one of the things we're doing at the AIAA UAPIOC is we're providing recommendations, or so I'll say we're preparing recommendations in order to update the aviation publications in order to require reporting of this. And we're also preparing recommendations on the mechanisms with which that reporting should occur.
Going to data now, looking at all of the multiple UAP sightings that you've seen for pilots, and this could be just North American data, let's just say for now. And obviously, I'm not sure if you're studying data from around the world and speaking with pilots from around the world, and we'll get to that. But when looking at the data, what correlations are you seeing? Are you seeing correlations based on time? Are you seeing correlations based on object? Data is so important for us to understand what's actually going on. And obviously, the human interest story is just as important. But just outside of that, we have to look at what are those correlations to find what those connections are. Are you seeing them based on time, object, or shape, or what is that you're collecting and seeing right now?
We're not at a position where we can talk about correlation of that in the data yet. So that's not the place we're at yet, but that's obviously where we'd want to go, and that's what we'd see, and we would be communicating in the scientific papers that come out of the AIAA. And so that's exactly where we want to go, but that's just not where we are quite yet.
And that's amazing, and I look forward to seeing that. I'm always curious to see when looking at different data banks, obviously of information that are UAP data that you can somewhat scrape and get your hands onto, is seeing what those correlations are. Now, looking at pilots from around the world, we focus so much on North America when there's things happening obviously every day around the world from all different parts of the air. Have you been speaking to pilots from different countries? And if so, what have their experience, what has their experiences been?
Yeah, so I have not had the opportunity to speak with too many international pilots, but I will say I have spoken with some, and the ones that I have, not unfortunately, but are ones that kind of operate not too far distant from the United States, and so it's not as wide of a data set as I would like. I think that international conversation on this is very important, and I'm very happy to support any international pilots that would like to come on the podcast and share their story. In fact, one of our next interviews is going to be actually an international pilot, but again, not too far away.
What countries have you been speaking to, just in curiosity?
Aviator specific or just
Just
generally?
just in general, and aviator specific, of both. I'm curious to
Aviators, like I
see.
said,
Yeah,
not too much, but I mean, I've been doing I've done a lot of media internationally. I don't think it gets covered here too much because it's usually a different language, but I mean, a good number of European countries, UK, various places, Australia, Japan. I can't, I don't know, but I mean, just a lot of international interest, really, a lot of different places in South America that. So it's really I love doing the international interviews because they're just more passionate on the topic from the get-go, in a sense. They're not coming at it with as much disdain, I'd say, as initially we would see within the mainstream US media. So it was a nice
yeah.
reprieve.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see that, over time, we're pilots from around the world, and I'd love to speak with you about this again, and obviously watch your podcast and see all these different pilots from around the world and what they're saying, because I think it's really important that this is an international conversation. It really is. It's way more of an international conversation than it is just a North American conversation. So those
Mhm.
pilot stories are just as important, and it's curious to see that they're seeing them around all over the world, and we should be able to talk about that. And if they're having close calls with them as well, and within their governments, and working with different fighter jets or pilots, then those need to be documented, and we need to be able to have an ability to share those conversations with each other.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So I want to ask you too now, the phenomenon, obviously, this has been somewhat of a new paradigm shift for you, starting from when you first really got yourself into the UAP discussion and where you are now. How has the evolution of your thoughts of what's actually happening? Because we have multiple theories, right? We have the ET hypothesis, we have a time traveler hypothesis, we have multidimensional, we have that they obviously could be foreign adversaries, they could be American tech. Looking at the beginning of your first thought of what was actually happening, what has been the evolution into where you think what's actually happening now? And how has that changed and what has influenced it?
Phew. Um, there could be a lot there. It's a big question. Um, Without going too much into it, I am still very much uh agnostic, right? Because we're still on a stair step case as far as um what we can support with actual data. So um I think it's going to be a lot of things, right? I don't think we're going to find the one thing and that's what it is, right? I'm sure there's adversarial spying going on in this conversation somewhere. I'm sure there's some US stuff mixed in somewhere, but that's probably much lower probability now. Um, but there is a much larger category of other that is interesting that we're focusing on. This isn't a matter of just uncharacterized trash in the air due to low resolution. Okay, I think some people try to cling on to the fact that this is just a matter of better cameras to see the trash better than things are no longer anomalous. There's enough anomalous here that is transparently anomalous that's why Congress and the Senate have been focusing their legislation to ensure that this is cross-domain, transmedium, and and looking specifically at the things that we don't know what they are, so that we're not getting pulled into counterintelligence conversations on the foreign adversary side or other things. Um, so to answer your question, there is a bucket of anomalous that we have to work through, and the answers to your questions aren't there yet, or the ways to get there, um, but there's a path, and I think we are going to get there eventually.
Yeah. When you first looked at this, what was the hypothesis that you attached yourself to initially
I didn't
first?
attach myself to any hypothesis. That's
Interesting.
exactly it, right? Like I don't have a hypothesis that I attached. I mean, we walked through it with a staircase. I mean, we initially thought it was a radar error, then we thought it was a drone, then we thought it was um, maybe not a drone, but now we don't know. And now I'm in the same position. I'm just trying to answer the question with different tools, right? And so I don't attach myself to that to any one of those hypotheses, and I consider them, and I walk down that path a little bit, and I walk back, but I wait to for conclusions and for those type of considerations until I have something more solid to go on.
No, I think that's great. I think looking at it analytically makes sense, right?
It's the
And
only
I'm
way I
just
can do it. I don't know. Like I'd probably go crazy, right? If I didn't, I'd be lost down too many rabbit holes. So,
Well,
uh,
it's true, and my evolution of my, being in this, and not in the UAP community, let's just say, or someone podcasting in it, but following this narrative as someone who was really young, and my father was, interested in and had his own UAP sighting, so with a group of people, so it was something that my evolution of what I feel is going on doesn't mean I'm right, but what I'm following has changed immensely because I've learned way more than I ever thought I would. And obviously, we have way more data now that we can look at, and we have way more testimonies and whistleblowers coming forward. So it's very different than it was, let's say, in the early 80s from Bob Lazar to what it is now. Right.
mm,
And we do have that wonderful evolution that's
mm.
happened. And hopefully it's going to get better and it will become way more academic in the years to come.
The way I think about that bucket, in my opinion, I've seen enough evidence inside the anomalous bucket to consider that there is another, you know, entity, a consciousness. There is something there that is other, but the format where it comes from, right? Like that's the big question. And sufficiently advanced technology could make things seem like it's interdimensional when it's very much not. Or faster than light travel could make aliens also time travelers, right? Because if they're moving faster than the speed of light. So things I think are gonna get messier before they get clearer, but that's because we're gonna start really uncovering stuff and be able to figure out some things that aren't just buried in our imaginations or our assumptions, but based on reality, which is often much weirder than what we can imagine.
No, for sure. And we've seen obviously you've talked to Gary Nolan, you've talked to multiple different people, you've obviously have been interviewed by multiple people as well. Has the stigma around this, and we look at, John Mack, for example, a Harvard psychologist, the top Harvard psychologist looking into this and the ridicule that has happened throughout your career so far, then what has been the negative backlash? And also what has been the positive? But what has been the negative backlash that you've seen that's obviously affected your career to date?
Well, negative backlash, I'd say it's probably the same stuff that anyone would imagine that would come with this topic, with just regular, people being uncomfortable with the topic, or questioning your either motives or what have you around it. I don't think anyone really questioned my sanity, but just due to the fact that I just finished flying aircraft, but they're, very much wondering what the motives or what the trick was, or what's going on. So that was, I think, the same thing that I think a lot of people have had to contend with in this topic, right? Trying to rationalize their decision to pursue something that someone else thinks is not real. or whatever, whatever category or bucket they put it into. And so obviously that's a challenge, but I don't think it affected me in my career at all. My career has been exactly what I wanted to make of it since I got out of the Navy. And that included, incredible jobs within the defense industry, working on some, cool technology and basically doing the same thing I'm doing this topic, which is helping, the troops in the air in 10 or 15 years with the technology and systems that I was working to put in place for them for future battles. That's what we do in those positions when you work in R&D in the defense industry. And I quit that to go into a startup to work with advanced generative quantum generative materials. There it is. That was the name of the company, right? And I was very happy to go there, and that was an advancement for me. And that was an awesome opportunity to learn about the cutting edge of generative machine learning techniques and how it can be applied to machine learning or to material science and material property prediction, all sorts of cool stuff.
So are you
And then
looking to AI then? Is that part of that? Is that in that bucket?
the bucket of anomalous.
Yeah, no, just in the what you were studying and working on before, because I know that you were working with DARPA and a whole bunch of other agencies before. Was AI or anything
Yeah,
attached to it
certainly,
or
yeah.
associated with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was working on multi-agent collaborative intelligences for like a autonomous wingman and things of that nature.
No,
Um,
the reason why I asked that too is because looking at potentially, UAP being operated by some form of AI, personally, I feel that that is way more, it being some kind of reconnaissance or some kind of drone of some sorts that we don't know, it maybe not of our own, but some form of data collecting, and that it's used as a computer, rather than it's an intelligent computer, rather than it being something that's, let's say, alive. Depending if people want to say that's sentient or not. But
mhm.
how has your work then, if it's working within AI, then affected your thoughts around the UAP discussion?
Well, it's given me a lot of interesting ideas about how to potentially analyze the behavior of these objects in relation to each other in the context of the areas that they're operating in. And so using that, you can kind of back engineer some potential swarm mechanics that could be utilized in that. And then you can start looking into intent and some interesting things like that. So, whenever you think about trying to defeat an adversary drone swarm or something of that nature, the difference between defeating, whenever you need to defeat something, you need to be able to identify it and track it first. So that's what we want to do with UAP and get to better understand and predict what they're going to do or where they're going to be and why.
Is there any way that this could possibly be foreign adversary tech? We know that China's had amazing drone supremacy over the past couple of years. And we've also seen that mainstream media, for example, Julian Barnes from the New York Times has come forward and has said that he thinks and that potentially this could be China. It's very concerning, obviously, if it is China and the American government doesn't have the capabilities to be able to have this similar technology. So, in your mind, is there any possibility that this could possibly be foreign adversary tech?
I think there's two parts here. The first part is that there is foreign adversaries and they are likely taking advantage of the situation or were working to do their own spying regardless of this. And so that's likely just part of life as in the modern world right now. And that is part of the equation, no doubt. But that isn't necessarily what that isn't saying that China or those foreign adversaries are utilizing exotic or unexplainable technology, just that they're in that data set, which is being identified as perhaps drones or something that we don't know what it is. But, upon closer inspection, we do find out it's China doing something, right? And it ends up being not interesting. But again, that's not what we're worried about or not or considered about is the anomalous stuff, right? And there's enough of that. And that's where the interesting flight mechanics are and the stuff that represents technology that we're not necessarily sure what it is, and that's what we're concerned about, right? And that's not China and that's not the foreign adversary. So there's, yes, foreign adversaries are probably in this bucket of things that are somewhat, some stuff's getting explained and filtered out, but that doesn't mean they're doing the cool exotic stuff.
And I'm really glad that you explained that, because there is a worry that, and even for myself, if we're looking at, say, different, foreign adversary tech, and that, let's say, American and North American tech is not the same ability, it's pretty scary to know that we're not able to combat that and we don't understand it. So I'm glad that you've explained the difference between that and what exotic tech would be, because that's a better way, I think, of putting it. Because we've looked at people from the New York Times, like Julian himself, that's kind of washed over the topic and has said, well, it's just China. And in the end of his piece, it's like, well, but there's still that little 1% that we're looking at. So I think
More
that's
than
really,
1%. I'll tell you that,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
there's a pretty big bucket of stuff that we can see with multiple sensors that are doing interesting stuff. So, it's not like we're going to just get down to one magic case here. You know what I mean? There's a decent number of them. I mean, I
Yeah.
think there's probably more anomalous stuff than going on than the China scenario, to be honest.
100%. 100%. So I have to ask this, because crash retrievals is always going to be a topic now, I think, of 2023. Well, we're seeing that it's subtly, people are potentially the Whistleblower Act is obviously, whistleblowers have or will be protected, that we know of. So are you working in attachment with anything into regards to crash retrieval, or these conversations of other whistleblowers coming out? And with that, maybe, are there other pilots, and are you collecting different pilots to come forward to even having more testimonies, and what that will look like this year?
Just to loosely answer is that no, I'm not participating in that activity at all. I provided I provided some small input on the NDA that helped enable that, but I don't play any role in bringing anyone forward in that.
In curiosity, do you get together with your squadron that you were working with in 2014 and 2015 to talk about these experiences?
Just very few. A lot of them are still in. And so, they're off at wars right now and deployments and, whatever they're doing. It's very busy. But some the guys that got out a little more time, and I have, hung out with some and talked, spoke with some. Some will be hearing some, geez Louise, we'll be hearing from some on my podcast soon as well. And so we'll be able to directly share some more of those stories, right? I've been hearing a lot. I mean, I've been hearing a lot from commercial pilots who've just been saying how, a lot of people have been talking about this within the cockpits, right? Like the pilots are now talking about it, but they're just still not happy with the way mainstream media is communicating on this topic. And it leaves them fearful of engaging on it, because the way these jobs work for pilots is, if you're in a job for 40 years and you want to go to the other airline, you can't just like hop over and keep your position. You go all the way back to the bottom of the 20,000 pilots there or something, right? And so you lose you basically lose your retirement, more or less, because that's when you make all your money at the end. So you're stuck
Right.
once you're there. And so speaking out, or like if you were to get fired at that point, that's it for your career flying. Like there's no just like getting hired at another airline and like stepping in at that same rank, same position. So um, they're scared that, if they get embarrassed on national TV or anything like that, they could lose their job very easily. And so that's another reason why I created that podcast, so that we could make sure that it's done right and that these guys can have these conversations seriously and not have that fear.
Oh yeah, I can imagine you don't want to lose your wings. It's your livelihood, and it's also your
Mhm.
passion. You take so much time training and learning to be any form of aviation or pilot. So why would you ever want that to happen to you? Are there
And
any?
yes, some of these pilots have had experiences that have been so powerful for them that they've had artists draw renditions, and they've seen things with multiple aircraft, with multiple air crew, that they still are in touch with, 20 years later about their experiences, because they're just like changed their life, and yet they can't share it anywhere else, really. What a burden to carry.
Yeah, it's so hard. And then trying to find an answer, that you might not ever get your entire life. There's no closure in
Mm,
that. And that's really hard. And I can imagine if people not believing you, or making fun of you, or you even questioning your own sanity and what's
mm.
going on. So I think with any of those type of experiences, it's very challenging. So you do need people like yourself and other agencies to get involved and be able to shed light on what's happening, so that people can have some form of closure and understanding what their experiences were. Have you had, or sorry, I should ask, are there any misconceptions that you would like to clear up that people have had about your experiences or yourself or your work over the years, that, you're kind of like, you keep screaming down that hallway saying, no, that's not what it is. Is there anything that there are major
Honestly, I
misconceptions?
haven't paid too much attention to the noise, so you tell me, what should I defend myself against?
Oh, I don't think you need, it's up to you. I would say, and
I don't know.
I really
I don't think
respect.
I have anything to defend, really. I don't know if people are trash talking somewhere. I haven't been listening.
And I respect that immensely. Because I think that I can tell that you're stuck to your goal and what you want out of all of this. And it's important, because really, does it matter what everyone's saying around you when you know that you are focused on one particular goal? So
I
I
can
admire
sleep at
that.
night.
That 100%. So I know, before we close, I just want to say, where can people get your podcast, and how often is it running, so people know? And then can you shed some light on some other guests that will be coming up outside of pilots?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's called Merd Podcast, and you can find us on YouTube or any of the streaming services, Apple, Spotify, etc. For the non-video version. We're going to have an episode come out every 2 weeks right now, and we're going to switch to weekly by the middle of March. And so we'll be able to be rocking and rolling at that point and bring cool stories nonstop. The next few episodes we'll have pilots. We have one that was an F-18 pilot who was witnessing objects off the East Coast, and then he got out as a commercial pilot, and now he's flying around and he's having these experiences as he's flying off the West Coast with these objects coming down out of the sky and circling over his aircraft. Very interesting story. We have another gentleman who is a commercial pilot, no military experience, and he had incredible experience back in the 90s, seeing 3 discs just come off and go into space with multiple aircraft, seeing it, just incredible story. And he's been seeing objects, again, over the continental United States happening on a regular basis right now. And then we have another gentleman who is a F-18 pilot. And I'm purposely not revealing any names at the moment, but he was an F-18 pilot who unfortunately holds the record for the fastest ejection in the Navy. And he's got an incredible story about his experience and his recovery. And he was also involved in the UAP game a little bit with his experiences in the jet and during his recovery as well. So it'll be great.
Wow. Yeah,
Well,
it's
be
exciting.
interesting, but it's an incredibly moving story.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I can't wait to hear their stories. I'm like, it's so important that we get the pilot's perspective, because we haven't had that for years. So it's a whole new group of people coming in and having a larger voice. So thank you for that. And as I say to all my guests, thank you so much, Ryan, for being rebelliously curious with me today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.